will start the first talk today.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you very much for the organizers for inviting me to give this talk about how to feed a preterm neonate. I do it on behalf of my cross appointment with McMaster University and with Paracelsus Medical School here in Nuremberg, Germany. This is the content of my talk: nutrition, growth, neurodevelopmental and other outcome, introducing enteral feeds, sepsis and necrotizing enterocolitis, sources of nutrition, variability of breast milk composition and fortification strategies. Just a second. I need to, sorry. Okay.
Let's start again.
Okay.
And about your cell phone, can you switch off your sound because it might...
I think I did that before.
Great.
Let me see. No, it's this is on mute, and the other one, I have the deck telephone still on. How do I switch that off here?
Because we had some situations with...
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I can switch that one completely off. Okay, good. So we start again.
Okay. So 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello and good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference to give you a talk about how to feed a preterm neonate. This is the content of my talk: nutrition, growth, neurodevelopmental and other outcomes, introducing enteral feeds and the relation to sepsis and necrotizing enterocolitis, sources of nutrition, variability of breast milk composition and fortification strategies. However, I will not present cookbook recipes for implementing enteral feeds, and I will not cover the subject probiotics because it's a topic on its own. And protocols guidelines should be adapted to local conditions and needs as much as I present them here. So what shall we do as neonatologists or as neonatal team when we are caring for very tiny preterm babies is that we should achieve rates of growth and composition of weight gain for a normal fetus of the same postmenstrual age and to maintain normal concentrations of blood and tissue nutrients. And this is recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And that is easier said than done, though it's put in just one sentence. If you look at this slide, then you see what that means. On one hand, we should achieve appropriate growth rates, somehow like in utero, which means most likely parallel to a certain percentile. Which one needs to be defined? Second thing is a medium term outcome, allow organ differentiation and a good brain function like here. And the third one is to allow for good body composition when we make babies grow. To have long-term effects on adult diseases minimized, like arteriosclerosis or other metabolic or neurological disease. And that has to do with body composition and the amount of fat mass that we give to babies. The landmark study that assesses the relationship of growth and neurodevelopmental outcomes by Rich Ehrenkrantz, and what he did is here 4 quartiles of normally growing babies in neonatal care. And he correlates it to the neurodevelopmental outcome at discharge or at 18 to 22 months. And what you see here is a clear relationship between rate of growth, these are the slow growers, these are the faster growers, and neurodevelopmental performance. And that holds true at the age of 2 years. There is also a relationship between nutrient intake and later neurodevelopmental outcome, like shown in this study by Stevens, where they found out that each kilocalorie per kilogram per day that you manage to get into the baby during the first week of life increases the mental developmental index by 0.46 points, and each gram protein per kilogram per day increases the Bailey by MDI by 8.2 points. And it's also about the body composition. You see here that fat mass from Sarah Ramel's group is correlated to the 4-year outcome, the growth in utero within the unit. So which growth patterns do NICU actually achieve? This again are data from Rich Ehrenkrantz, and you see that the postnatal growth trajectories here deviate significantly from intrauterine trajectories. And this is also true if you look into registry data, like from the Vermont Oxford neonatal data. Then you see here that there are small for gestational age babies in this unit or in the whole registry around 15 to 23%, and at discharge this amounts to 45 or 53%, which is an increase by 210 to 300%. And in this study that was part of an interventional trial assessing PUFA supplementation on neuro outcome, you also find that the amount of SGA babies here at admission and at discharge was increasing, showing postnatal growth failure. And these were babies that were fed predominantly standard fortified breast milk. So what does it matter how babies grow after birth? All babies lose weight and then start to regrow. And now the question is, where do we need to grow? But let's take this baby and put it on different percentiles or on different trajectories across different percentiles. Then you will see that there is an increase in lean mass, but there is a bigger increase for the same baby across these different percentiles in fat mass. So different body composition. And is there something like risky body composition? Maybe for this dog as well, but it's also for preterm babies the case. What you see here are trajectories of growth among children who have coronary events as adults. Is a great study by Barker. And what you see here is that these kids increase their weight before puberty much more than they grow in length, which leads to an increased BMI before puberty. That is true for boys here and for girls. If you look at the growth patterns of ex-preemie babies here, up to the age here of 23 years, and there are now data available up to 36 years, and you see a similar pattern that they grow in weight much faster pre-pubertal than in height, leading to an increased BMI, which might put these preemie babies at risk for later developmental origin of health and diseases. There are now follow-up data available that indeed show that ex-preemies might have a higher risk for this kind of diseases. So appropriate body composition matters. I showed you already that too high % body fat is not good, but too low % body fat is also problematic because it compromises leptin levels, and they act as a central switch and help with the functioning of immune system. But also subcutaneous fat cells are directly involved into fighting Staph aureus skin infections by producing bactericidal substances that has been very recently shown here in this paper. Coming back to leptin, fat mass is the only endocrinological organ and source for leptin. And as I said, leptin acts as a central switch for a lot of procedures happening in the human body, like menstrual cycle, like LH-RH system, but it also has an impact on immune function, as was shown here in these recent papers from 2017 and this from 2019. So how do we monitor growth? Usually we only monitor weight gain, and we usually use Fenton curves like these ones and plot very bravely weight and are happy if the weight develops like this. How are these Fenton charts being made? Might be of interest. They're basically a composition of fetal growth charts from different sources, intergrowth or Fenton charts or whatever, and then the postnatal growth charts from the World Health Organization in growth charts of healthy term babies. What you see here is that there is a gap between these two curves, which is absolutely explainable because of the postnatal loss of water or weight loss that shifts the 90th percentile of fetal weight to the 90th percentile after completed postnatal adaptation. That looks like this if we would transition these charts together. So now we put the overlay here on the Fenton charts, but the Fenton charts look different. And why is this the case? Because There was a linear extrapolation from around 34, 35 weeks up to 45, 50 weeks to combine these two growth charts. And that is fine, that is good, but the problem is that doesn't give us a true help here where a baby should transition to. And that is one of the reasons why some babies do not grow very well, because we are lost in a kind of no man's land here, because we have no good hint where the babies should grow. Definitely they won't go back to their normal trajectory that they lost at birth because of the irreversible contraction of extracellular space. That would be wrong. So they have to grow somewhere. So we had a look into that problem. And again, here you see it for term babies. We have this transition, we call it thesis, which is the term contraction of extracellular space, which here contributes mostly to water loss. It's also a little bit nutritional deficit, but mostly is this one-time irreversible contraction of the extracellular space. Now, preterm babies do the same thing. They do it here, but then they don't do it here again. So that's why we think that the trajectory of a healthy term baby, preterm baby, would go like this. You do this postnatal adaptation of water spaces that is completed somewhere here after 1 to 3 weeks, and then you continue growing to reach your placenta that you have lost here. And if you do that, then you need to find this point, and this point obviously is defined. And we tried, this is again shown here, and we tried to find this point here, and therefore we did this study in 3,700 babies in 5 hospitals in Canada and in Germany, and we only took the unimpaired adapters, which we defined prospectively, not retrospectively, and came up with nearly 1,000 babies, and we looked into the growth curves of the first 21 days of all these kids, and then we're very surprised to see that these relatively healthy kids all transition to a new percentile here, and all transition in terms of Z-score to a new trajectory that runs below 0.6 to 0.8 Z-scores. So that's why we thought we develop kind of individualized growth trajectory for each baby. Again, starting here, doing this postnatal water contraction and with this data that we achieved in 1,000 babies, and then connecting this placenta that was lost at around 42 to 44 weeks, and that is a new trajectory. If you like this, this concept, you can have a look into the website where we programmed these individualized trajectories under growthcalculator.org, not .com, that's a different one, .org. So now how do we make babies grow according or along these percentiles? Obviously, we have to introduce enteral feeds because we can't leave the baby on parenteral feeds, which they get frequently during the first days. But there's more and more evidence that we can feed babies faster and earlier. And let's have a look into the game of perinatal medicine that we are playing each day. So it's together with the colleagues of maternal fetal medicine and obstetrics. And basically the major task of our colleagues is that we have to minimize prenatal inflammation, corium neonatis, and to avoid to have a lack of oxygen. So deliver the fetus as healthy as possible. And then we receive the baby, and then we have a kind of lung immaturity or lung disease, and that requires a certain respiratory support. This respiratory support then interferes with enteral feeding, because if a baby is heavily ventilated or is maybe even has a kind of dyspnea, then it's not so easy to feed it, and that's why we need then lines to give babies parenteral nutrition. So if we delay this process unnecessarily, then we get a higher rate of sepsis-related or line-related sepsis episodes, and when these babies crash, then they become frequently respiratory unstable, get re-intubated, then we might have problems again with introducing or maintaining enteral feeds. So this is a vicious cycle that needs to be broken. So there are many factors that interfere with introduction and advancement of enteral feeds, like these here. There are lots of data now on it. It's a very, very well-studied subject. These are all questions where you find solutions and answers in literature. and you can use this. But then there comes another thing on top of it, which is anxiety, angst, beliefs, local habits, and culture in certain units, not to advance enteral feeds, though we know that it should work. So the anxiety and angst in local cultures mostly go around try to avoid a PDA, which nowadays we know it's not so much the fluid volume that we give, but it's more about sepsis, background inflammation, and as we said, beliefs. TFI is rather the driver. And necrotizing enterocolitis, where we are afraid that babies get this terrible disease where sometimes half of the gut can be gone or babies even die. But is it a good way to manipulate enteral feeds to get or to avoid necrotizing enterocolitis? So let's have a look into this data. This is a gut with necrotizing enterocolitis, and this was a feeding program that we had at McMaster in 2009, relatively reasonable, a few days for these weight categories of minimal feeding, and then pretty straightforward increase. So most babies should be after 14 days to 3 weeks on enteral nutrition, on full enteral nutrition, which nowadays we would do it faster, but at that time was not a bad dynamics. So what you see here is what we achieved in everyday practice is that we heavily deviated in all these babies. There was a retrospective chart review here in 53 and here in 18 babies. So we heavily deviated from the intended practice, mostly because we were scared about gastric, or the team was scared about gastric residuals. Then we didn't advance. Then again, the sepsis came, and then we have to restart again. So if we look at this international study that has recently been published in 2019, and that compared 10 or 12 units all across the world, or regions all across the world, they looked here into the different dynamics of introducing enteral feeds. So here they were used up to 40, 60 days until these babies were on full enteral feeds. And here in this region, they were already up to around 2 weeks. So they made correlations here with necrotizing enterocolitis, and there was no correlation between the speed of introducing feeds. Here is up to 120 milliliters per kilogram, but there was a clear relationship to the use of antibiotics, which also reflects the sepsis rates. So in this nice study, there was no relationship between introducing enteral feeds and necrotizing enterocolitis, but sepsis. Similar thing was found already many years ago, published here in 2009 by the German Neonatal Network, where we divided babies in fast advancers and slow advancers, units in fast advancers and slow advancers, and then you saw that the sepsis rates here were much higher in the slow advancers compared to the late advancers. And there are now also Cochrane reviews available that show that there is no correlation between different speeds of implementing enteral feeds, here 30 versus 40 and 15 versus 24. They do not increase risk for NEC, but they reduce mortality rates, the faster ones, and they decrease the risk for sepsis here. So it's worthwhile looking at the practice of implementing enteral feeds in your own unit. So let's look into gastric residuals as a major driver for delayed introduction of enteral feeds. And let's first look into the definition of gastric residuals and also of the definition of clinical relevance. And I quote here a few data published by Joe Noy. And you see here that a review shows that in scientific studies, this here is defined as clinical relevance. So it's all over the place, which shows that we do not really know what we are talking about here. There is not a very well-defined thing of gastric residual that is normal or unnormal, or of nutritional intolerance. Let's have a look into the physiology. What do we know? There are very limited data about secretion rates of saliva and gastric juice and preterm newborn infants. In adults, we know that we are producing about 2.5 to 4 liters. And if we break that down into milliliters per kilogram per day, where we as neonatologists are used to more than adult people, then this corresponds to 25 to 50 milliliters per kilogram per day. And these are numbers of feeds that we would achieve during the first 2 to 3 days. So this is already the normal throughput through a gut. It's not 1 or 2 or 3 milliliters per kilogram per day. We sometimes fight about as a team, should we advance or not? No, the gut is already exposed to this amount of milliliters per kilogram per day. And this also has an influence of potential gastric residuals that we have. So what do we know about gastric residuals? They are smallest in prone position, they are largest in supine position, shown in these papers, and in left lateral position, they are that is superior to prone position, and the right lateral positioning is worst. So we the amount of gastric residuals is not a given, but can be influenced by position. Kangarooing apparently is superior to flat prone position. So this is about physiology. And here's a super great study from Donna Geddes' group from Australia. And she looked here into 17 babies below 1,500 gram and 23 babies above 1,400 gram. These were 3-hourly feeders. These were 2-hourly feeders. With ultrasound, what is the amount of gastric fluid left after feeding? And you see these data here in these 17 kids. And you see that short before the next feeds that they don't come to zero, regardless whether they give 100% of the intended feed or only 75%. And the same is true and partly even more pronounced in these bigger babies. And this again is the whole data given as applied percent of applied volume. And if we look into the analysis, then you see that gastric residuals before the next feed are between 0 and 6.7 milliliters or 8 milliliters, depending on whether we have 2 or 3 hourly feeders. And an empty stomach was only found in 5 of 34, 18 of 36, or 11 of 46 opportunities. Casein delays and fat increases gastric emptying, and this has also to do with how breast milk is composed. So we cannot necessarily expect that there are no gastric residuals and that a few milliliters of gastric residuals indicate bad gastric function. There are further data like here, already very old, in preterm babies, relatively big ones, that the mean gastric residual was around 4 milliliters. And here are studies now that compare the practice to check gastric residuals or not to check gastric residuals. And there were no differences in enteral intake 2 weeks after birth or 3 weeks or days to reach full enteral feeds, defined as 120 or 150 milliliters per kilogram per day. And there were no difference in clinical outcomes like sepsis or liver disease or necrotizing enterocolitis. Although the numbers were too small to find a difference for necrotizing. This study here again did a similar thing, checking without checking, and found that discharge happens 8.2 days earlier in the no gastric residual check group. We did a similar study in slightly bigger babies because we wanted first to start with these ones because we went to the very small ones. And we found a similar thing that there was no difference between the plus or minus gastric residual check. And interestingly, we found that the hardest step was psychologically to reach a feeding volume of up to 40 milliliters. There was a most forth and back. Once you were beyond 40 milliliters, there were usually no problems also psychologically in accepting to move forward. Let's go to color. This study found that only hemorrhagic residuals were significant and green has nothing to say. And in this study here, the gastric volume was 113% of the previous feed that was associated with necrotizing enterocolitis. So really big numbers. This is not 1 to 2 milliliters. This is considerably more. Are gastric residuals associated with NEC? In this study, you see that they are not. It's already a study that is about 20 years old. And also green is not a color to be afraid of dysfunction, only bloody or black gastric residuals. And the volume that they found in this study was at least 3 milliliters as absolutely normal. And the volume of gastric residuals 24 hours before necrotizing enterocolitis was only 1.2 milliliters. So no correlation. Are gastric residuals associated with NEC again in this study? It's a great study in 44 kids that experienced necrotizing enterocolitis, and up to a period of 36 hours before starting necrotizing enterocolitis, they looked into different clinical parameters. And the other results, gastric residuals were never been found to be an indicator. Others, yes, distension, vomiting, but not gastric residuals. So let's get rid of measuring gastric residuals. I think the data are pretty clear about that. Yeah, now nutrition can be improved by focusing on it, by implementing feeding protocols. And this is a study that is already a few years old, and there's a plethora now coming up where people show that if you focus on feeding babies better and getting more nutrients in, then they will grow better. We did the same thing here 2012, the data from Greifswald, where we had to wait for a new developmental follow-up. That's why we published them a few years later. But you see here what we did and changed, and we found a significantly better growth as well. And what we found at that time already, we had a wireless LAN laptop-based program already in 2008 implemented that worked very well. And now there are more data on it that feeding protocols introduced with the help of computers, laptops, is superior to not doing this. This is a study from Austria that shows that with computer-aided feeding protocols, you get more protein in these kids and more fat, and you reduce the amount of of SGA babies at discharge, or increase the number of AGA babies at discharge significantly. And this is a study with a different program from the Swedish guys, where they have a kind of red light even system to indicate whether you are good or whether it's questionable or you need to be careful. And if you use this program, they did a study, then you increase the energy intake, you increase the carbohydrate intake, amino acid intake, and this even results in better growth. So that's fine. You need to focus on nutrition. But there's a caveat with improved growth rates. You need not only to focus on energy and on protein, but you also need to make sure that you get enough other stuff like electrolytes and minerals, like in this study from Sissel Moltu, where they found initially an increase of sepsis rates from 29 to 63% by increasing feeds, but unfortunately, there was not given enough phosphate, so they risked a depletion of phosphate, and they induced a kind of refeeding syndrome. When you avoid this, then the sepsis rate stays normal. Now, what do babies need to grow? Amino acids, obviously, and you see you need 1 gram per kilogram here for not to grow. And it's a relatively stable relationship from all these studies that have been published. And here you need about 4 grams of protein to achieve growth of 20 grams per kilogram per day, here expressed as nitrogen retention. Here are the conversion factors. So protein intake determines growth rates. However, there is also energy that is important. And here you see protein gain, here you see protein intake, and here you see metabolizable energy. And you see if you, regardless how much protein you give, if you go with your energy below a certain level, then your protein gain goes down, because building up lean mass is an energy consuming, energy requiring process, and you need to have enough to avoid protein breakdown or protein oxidation, which is an unfavorable use of ingested protein. So if we look here, where do we achieve appropriate growth? And that would be in this range where we have enough energy, not to make babies fat, but to have adequate lean mass with an appropriate fat mass. That would be around here. Here we would babies would get excess growth. Here babies would excess fat mass especially. Here they would get not enough growth, below the genetic potential, depending on how these intakes with energy and protein are. So we can define areas of optimum growth, areas of excess growth, and areas of restricted growth. Now we have a lot of opportunities to feed babies. We are different from 1985, where we only had formula with intact cow's milk protein extensively hydrolyzed. There's much more. There's now much more mother's milk or donor milk available. And mother's own milk is the preferred way because it contains many natural substances and cells. It contains oligosaccharides, which promote a good, usually a good microbiome. And the gut of the baby likes human proteins more than those from cow's milk, and costs obviously are low. However, macronutrient composition of breast milk is variable and not balanced, and macronutrient content generally is too low for preterm infants. And you see that here, this is what is required in 100 milliliters of nutrition, of enteral nutrition for babies according to ESPGHAN guidelines, and this is what breast milk usually has. And you see it declines during the first weeks after birth here significantly. So these babies cannot grow. And this is what the ESPGHAN recommends in protein, fat, and carbohydrates per 100 milliliters, so that we come up with around 160 milliliters of fluid. But with native breast milk, because it's so low in protein and also in energy, baby would need 250 to 350 milliliters per kilogram per day to grow with this, which apparently will not work. So that's why there was implemented or invented routine fortification using human milk fortifiers. And here you see the variability of breast milk composition in 10 mothers in 20 to 50 breast milk samples. And you see the fat values are all over the place, protein is all over the place, carbohydrates relatively stable, and diverse ratios as well. And this is what needs to be achieved. So what the macronutrient, what the fortifier does, it pumps up the protein and the energy content. But you see here that in this group of mothers, already after 4 weeks, there would be already 1/3 of the mothers below ESPGHAN recommendations. And 4 weeks for a 24-weeker is just 28 weeks. And this baby still needs to grow for many, many weeks with then decreasing protein intake. So that might not work despite standard fortification. Comes on top that the composition of the diverse fortifiers is not identical. There are different concepts of fortifiers, and it's worthwhile if you look into the fortifier, what you use, what you achieve. And we did this hypothetical calculation here. We see they all don't have enough protein, and these guys here over fortify with fat, and these here over fortify with carbohydrates. Now, when we looked into more than 1,000 samples that we had, we have now around 6,000 samples measured, then you see here that the composition of breast milk is indeed all over the place. It's not that you have a thin or a thick or enriched or a poor breast milk. The diverse components of breast milk, protein, lactose, and fat are not in relationship to each other. And this might put preterm babies at a certain problem. You see that here again, 13 mothers, 21 samples, here with different mothers here, the color codes. This produces a very poor breast milk with low protein and low fat. This here produces one with high protein and medium fat, and so on. So if we now go back to this slide, you have seen there's also fat here on the x-axis, protein intake on the y-axis. And if I do an overlay of these two, then and look into how can babies grow well or not so well, then you see that there are certain composition or certain breast milk samples that babies would be fed despite standard fortification, where they would not grow the right way. And that's exactly what this data from that I presented to you, that babies on breast milk standard fortify not all grow very well, does explain this phenomenon. Then it gets worse a little bit with donor milk. So donor milk is really a good nutrition overall, but the macronutrient content in this milk is still lower compared to normal mother milk, because donor's milk is usually received late in lactation, where protein contents are very, very low. And you see that here in our study that I will come to in a moment. These are the donor milk protein contents, and they are in the lower ends usually. So there are now, it is recognized that donor milk can put babies at a risk of insufficient nutrient intake due to low protein content. And there are few studies out that show that mother's own milk growth is better with that compared to mother's own milk growth is better with preterm formula and worse with donor human milk, because there is not enough in this. There seems to be a dose dependent effect. And interestingly, if you look for outcomes, then donor milk is not superior to preterm formula. It is much superior compared to necrotizing enterocolitis and sepsis, but not necessarily to the neurodevelopmental outcome like in this study. And also the recent study where we were also a contributing center with the Domino study showed that there were lower NEC rates in babies on Domino, also on donor milk, but that the neurodevelopmental outcome at the age of 2 years or at 18 months was not different, which means that we might have lost in the donor milk group some IQ points potentially due to slightly lower growth where the study was not powered for to detect. So all this is based on the major assumption of an average composition of breast milk, which is not correct for all preterm infants and can lead to significantly over and under nutrition. This effect is also frequently not taken into account in the design and interpretation of clinical studies, as well as conclusions drawn from such results. And to add more of an unbalanced diet does not help to fix the problem, because preterm infants have no self-regulation different to term infants. So they depend on what we are feeding them. So if a baby is not growing well, what do we need to do? These are common empirical practice. Some units increase feeding volume if clinical condition allows, from 160 to 180 to 200. That is not common practice in many units because some are afraid of feeding babies such high volumes, though it, from our own practical experience, it works relatively well. You can increase fortifier strength from 5 to 7.5%, for instance. You can increase protein intake by adding protein powder like 0.5 or 1 gram per 100 milliliter, or you can increase energy intake by adding fat and carbohydrates by adding MCT oil, two-component substances like Durcal. However, there are no published trials with high evidence that this works very well. There's one way to do it. If you don't measure breast milk, you can use adjustable fortification, which, like in this study, increases the fortifier here from 2.5 to 6.25%, plus adds diverse amounts of extra protein according to the biochemical reaction of the baby, which means the urea levels. If the urea levels go down, then you give more. If the urea level go up above a certain percentage or a certain level, then you decrease. In this study, you see that growth is better, 14.4 in standard versus 17.5 in adjusted. But with this standard deviation, you see that there are still a lot of babies that grow below 15 grams per kilogram per day, which I would say is unacceptable in this age and weight range. So now there's a new approach to measure milk to see what is in there, and then to do individualized fortification on top of routine fortification. We now can measure breast milk. There are diverse devices out, and there has been a lot of research in the last years to see whether they measure the right thing, and we feel now quite comfortable in using them, and others do the same thing. But you need to implement good laboratory practice. And if you do that, then you can really measure reliable things with it. So there's an older study from Australia that looked into individualized versus regular fortification in this group of babies and did not find a difference in growth. The funny thing is that there's not a difference in intake, though they measure and individualize it, they come up with the same amounts. So maybe that was not enough. And if there's no difference in intake, then there's also no difference in growth. But there are now more papers out that compare the different strategies, including targets, so with measured, and find that it's better than adjusted fortification. Growth is significantly better. And in this study, it's the same. Target fortification is superior to adjustable fortification. And in this study, target fortification with protein improves lean mass growth in very low birth weight infants. And there are a few other studies actually coming out, and study protocols have been published. So we will expect a few new other data in the next 1 to 2 years. This is our own trial that we published last year. Randomized control blinded study, target versus standard fortification. And you see that we here achieve with standard target fortification. So we're the same after standard fortification, but with target fortification, we achieved higher intakes in the intervention compared to the control group for protein, for carbohydrates, and also a little bit for fat. And that is due to the fact that North American fortifiers contain a lot of fat already. So we found a difference of 224 grams at 36 weeks of gestation. And if we looked into the subgroups with high protein in native breast milk and low protein in native breast milk, then there was no difference in the high protein group because there was no effect of the intervention because they already had high protein. But the low protein group had a difference of 372 grams. That was also favorable in body composition, which we measured. These were the growth trajectories. And we also found a tendency towards a better neurodevelopmental outcome at 18 months of age, but we missed statistical significance on a P of 5% level. So now there was a comment that, yeah, you just shift this here upwards. So why don't you give just more protein and more carbohydrates and then you achieve the same thing? You don't need to measure. So we did a secondary analysis and found if we do that, do just the standard enhancing plus add a little bit more protein or whatever, then we still have this cloud of intakes, whereas when we really measure every day, we come to the point here. And if we measure 3 times a week, then we significantly reduce the variability and also make the amount of protein to carbohydrates or to lipids much more coherent. And this is basically what the Aspergen recommendations plus minus 10% achieve. So this is what we have in Nuremberg now set up since spring 2018. You see funny things when you start to measure, especially that the staff develops interest in growth because they now understand nutritional physiology. And these are real life data. And this is what we measured where we are. And you don't see it when you have the sample in your hands. You really need to measure where you are. This is our sheet for target fortification, and these are growth rates achieved. Just to show you a few examples, we have now 237 babies on target fortification below 1,500 grams in 32 weeks. These are data from 17 babies below 1,000 or 27, where we did an analysis a few months ago, but we are actually looking into growth rates that we got with these ones. I'm not expecting that they're significantly different from here with and without target fortification. So I skip this one due to time pressure. This is the future for me, which might make things maybe more accepted for stuff. It's the FatMan, the fully automated target macronutrient enhancer, which is a combination of a kind of a coffee machine with a measuring device for blood gas analysis, and out comes the perfectly mixed breast milk with the right composition. So in summary, please develop an understanding about growth rates, nutritional physiology, and protein energy needs. Identify the most likely post-natal growth trajectory. Become familiar with Aspergen recommendations and make growth and nutrition part of your daily routine and rounds. Establish feeding protocols, use computer-aided order entry forms, Gastric residuals are not useful for decision-making about rate of introducing enteral feeds. I would suggest accept at least 5 milliliters per kilogram, not per day, as gastric residuals as normal. Audit your practice regularly in growth charts, but also once per year. Did you achieve what you were aiming for the whole group you are caring for? Preterm formula makes babies grow with predictable and adequate growth rates, including neurodevelopment. Trade-off is microbiome and neck. Mother's own milk and donor milk reduce the risk for necrotizing and enterocolitis. The trade-off is growth and neurodevelopmental. Fortification improves growth and neurodevelopmental outcome. The trade-off is neck protective effect due to exposition to cow's milk. Modern fortifiers should contain more protein, about 0.5 to 0.7 gram per kilogram more. And there's one now being on the market and the second one under investigation, and a more balanced mixture of fat and carbohydrates. For donor milk, additional supplementation using 0.3 to 0.5 gram protein per 100 milliliters seems to be reasonable. An adjusted fortification may help to improve neurodevelopmental outcome. Sorry, growth, but is not efficient in all preterm infants. Data about neurodevelopmental outcome are lacking. Target fortification is not a super fortification, but identifies infants from mothers with low or unbalanced macronutrient content of native breast milk. It provides intake according to Espingham. Data from our double-blind randomized control trial show that target fortification improves growth compared to standard fortification. It's kind of precision medicine. Target fortification seems to reduce the risk of poorer growth in infants fed either with donor milk and or on exclusive human milk diet. Data not shown. For both high-end fortification strategies, modern modular components need to be developed to conserve the neck protective effect of breast milk and minimize the pro-inflammatory potential. More research and clinical studies are needed, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Virgilio. You have any questions for a great talk? Looks like it's getting more and more complicated in terms of feeding. There is a question on the chat box. Could you comment on adding Nortase for preemies growing worse despite sufficient energy in the milk? I don't know what Nortase is.
Yeah, Nortase is it's an interesting thing. There was a recent paper on it coming from Berlin. They say that there might be some pancreatic insufficiency, relative pancreatic insufficiency in preterm babies. If you have optimized everything and babies still do not grow, then you have two reasons, maybe two potential reasons. One is this pancreatic insufficiency. The other one is that the growth is already reprogrammed in utero to stay small for gestational age. That can be. Indeed, because we now rarely see postnatal growth retardation, at least if we take our individualized trajectories as a comparator, much less than in previous years. We did as a next step, when we have really improved enteral intakes according to Espingham and babies don't grow, we use this Nortase now in a clinical study. And we have the impression that it works. And we don't see actually major side effects, but that is still too early to recommend it for everybody. But there is there's a rationale behind it to look into it.
Anybody in the panel? I don't see any questions in the chat box, but again, a great talk.
Thank you.
Virgilio, David, Merran, Karen, anybody has any questions?
I saw one question about growing below 0.6 Z-scores, whether we would consider that as normal or as extrauterine growth retardation.
Yeah.
And if I'm allowed to answer, I would not, because I think this 0.6, 0.7 is physiological, and you should be on this trajectory that you get your lost percentile back after 44, 42 or 46 weeks. And if you are there on track, and that usually corresponds to slightly below minus 0.6 to 0.7 Z-scores. I think that's fully appropriate for now, unless we know more how different components of body composition develop. There is a caveat in it that we now see that fat mass might develop earlier in preterm babies with the same dynamics as in term babies. They do it at 2 to 3 months of age, and preterm babies do it at a similar time, as maybe as a kind of postnatal adaptation due to extrauterine life and nutrition. If that is the case, then we have to rethink the whole issue about what is the right lean mass to achieve and how do we measure it new.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to be in the panel discussion at the end of the workshop. So if any more questions come up, you can answer them. Again, thanks for a fantastic talk again.
Thank you.
Merran, could you take over? Okay. You don't need any introduction. Everybody knows you in the NPMF. And Karen was introduced before. Due to the time limitation, I put in about a brief CV or bio about your titles and what you do. Take it away.
Thank you. I think we should go straight into the recorded talk. We have 23 questions to pose the audience during this recorded talk, and we will give you the answers in the live session.
Good afternoon and welcome to our workshop. Ensuring the workforce in neonatal units is a global challenge, and today we're going to discuss the importance of education, collaboration, and the need for investment to ensure that we have a sustainable workforce for the future. But firstly, let's introduce ourselves.
My name is Karen Walker, and I've been a neonatal nurse for more than 30 years. I worked initially in the United Kingdom, and I'm now based in Sydney, Australia. I completed a PhD and currently work as a clinical nurse consultant at a major tertiary perinatal centre in Sydney. I hold a clinical associate professor position with the University of Sydney, and I'm also an honorary research fellow with the George Institute for Global Health. As the president of the Council of International Neonatal Nurses, I have a strong interest in neonatal global issues. I've been fortunate through my work with the World Health Organization to work with my colleague Merran.
I'm Merran THOMSON. I'm a neonatologist based in London. I'm a clinician and a researcher and have an interest in global health. And it's a great pleasure for me to be presenting this workshop today with Karen. Today's workshop is going to be interactive. We're very interested in hearing about what's happening in your units and your country. So throughout this workshop, we're going to be asking some questions using a poll. When the question appears, a Zoom screen will appear by the side of the question, and in that will be the options for answer. Please select the options. Hopefully, the poll will be in English and in Russian. At the end of the workshop, we will review the questions with you all so that everybody can see the answers. In addition, please type any questions you have for us in the chat function at the bottom of the screen. We'll also look at these in the second half of the workshop. You can use English or Russian to type your questions.
So our first question is, where are you from? And please select the country that you currently work in. As we've said, Merran and I are based in the United Kingdom and Australia, but we are very interested in this workshop as where everyone else is located. And our second question is, please indicate your profession. So why should we worry about the neonatal workforce? Or even the health workforce in general? Because we know that we are going to need 18 million healthcare workers to achieve universal health coverage by 2030. And of those, over half are going to be nurses and midwives. As the sustainability of the workforce is a global issue. Let us look at this map, which shows the 6 WHO regions of the world, and at the bottom, the global averages. This shows the density of healthcare workers. Yellow is doctors, grey, nurses and midwives, orange, dentists, and blue, pharmacists, and is looking at the number per 10,000 of population. You can see that WHO region of Europe has over 40 doctors and 78 nurses per 10,000. The global average at the bottom is 18 doctors and 38 nurses. And if you look right at the top, World Health Organization Africa, they only have 3 doctors and 10 nurses per 10,000 of population. The available statistics show that over 40% of WHO member states report to have less than 10 medical doctors per 10,000 population, and over 26% report to have less than 3, highlighting that this is such a global challenge. Scaling up and strengthening the quality of health workforce, education and training to address the global gap of 18 million healthcare workers is so important and need to support, strengthen and empower the existing health workforce. It's a priority in the 2019 Multi-Agency SDG Global Action Plan and the WHO 13 General Programme of Work. But what's this workshop about?
Delivering high-quality neonatal care is a tremendous challenge for all, no matter where we practice. In this workshop today, we want to explore the knowledge and the available resources to help us on the journey to achieve sustainability of the workforce. Our objectives are to understand the need to collaborate and invest in education and development for both neonatal medical and nursing staff, and to reflect on the challenges with workforce sustainability. Throughout this presentation, we will illustrate that the neonatologists and the neonatal nurse perspectives on what's needed to happen are very much aligned. So what is a sustainable workforce? It's one where staff are happy. We can read here quotes from happy staff working in a sustainable working environment. Happy staff want to be at work because they will thrive. They have a good work-life balance and a good sense of well-being. When the workforce is unsustainable, it's one where staff are unhappy. Here we see quotes from staff working in an unsustainable working environment. They have a poor work-life balance and lack a sense of well-being. So what is a sustainable workforce? It's one where the employer recognises and values work-life balance, along with the 5 essential components of well-being. We need these to have a happy and healthy life. And what this means is that a happy workforce is a productive workforce. For us in healthcare, that means high quality patient care, good outcomes, and happy, satisfied parents and staff. But it's not just about having policies. It's not about having written guidelines for staff recruitment and retention, written documents for education and development, written policies for annual paternity, maternity, sick and compassionate leave, and not about just an appropriate pay structure. And it's not just up to our employers. Creating a sustainable workforce requires us, the neonatal workforce, to invest, collaborate, and work in partnership with our employers, Department of Health, government, payers, insurers. And maybe we have to be the initial drivers of change, even initiating and leading the process. I've mentioned work-life balance and well-being, so let's just take a very brief look at these. Work-life balance is fundamental to being able to do well in the things we care about. It's achieved when we get satisfaction and success from both our working and non-working roles, and there is a low level of conflict between these roles. Opportunity and experience in one role improve performance and satisfaction in other roles. Importantly, it's not about an equitable distribution of time or attention. There is no one single ideal model of well-being. Well-being depends on personal values, priorities, demands, and the resources a person can access and use to meet these demands. Employers who seek a sustainable workforce must take a very broad approach to work-life balance. Well-being is slightly different. It's a multidimensional thing and linked to work-life balance. It's often described using this model of 5 essential elements. Purpose or career is about liking the things we do every day. And it's the one that's most important to most people. The social element centers on having strong relationships in your life. Financial element is about being able to manage the economy of your life. Physical well-being is obviously good health. And community well-being is about having a sense of engagement in the area you live. For individuals, both work-life balance and well-being center on maintaining resources and finding an equilibrium, a balance in what we're doing. And these are quite momentary states that we flip in and out of being in a good place or a slightly bad place, but finding that equilibrium is very important to us. Sustainability, although it's dependent on work-life balance and a sense of well-being, is something that's more concrete than that. It actually requires specific actions. So sustainability is about using human resources, that's us, neonatal staff, in ways that don't deplete our well-being and our work-life balance. It's about facilitating neonatal staff's capabilities to perform now and in the future. There are many different practice models that we can look at for improving workforce sustainability. But as being happy in the workplace is extremely important to workforce sustainability, one of the things we can look at is the way we work in teams. And particularly look at a model suggested by the WHO. This is interprofessional collaborative practice, and it's a holistic approach to healthcare. The WHO defines IPCP as the provision of comprehensive healthcare services by multiple healthcare workers from different professional backgrounds who seek to work with patients, families, caregivers, and communities to provide high quality care across a number of settings. Now, you may say this is nothing new. I've heard what you're saying before. We do it. It's multidisciplinary team working, or perhaps you call it interdisciplinary team working. But this is different. So to help us understand how it's different, let's briefly look at this table, which highlights the key aspect of each model of working. On the left is multidisciplinary team working. This is a hierarchical system. It has strong leaders, with limited communication between the team members, and it views the baby and family as recipients of care. In the middle, we have interdisciplinary team working. This is less hierarchical, but it's not equal. It's less dependent on one central leader, and members understand each other's roles, but they still operate within their own their own disciplinary backgrounds. There's more communication within the team, but it's ineffective. It's a bit more inclusive of the baby and the family. They are viewed as team members, but team members with less authority. Interprofessional collaborative practice is a method where teams work with no hierarchy and no territory. All members are equally involved with the baby and the family as partners. Leadership is shared amongst the team. Input from other disciplines is actively sought. There's shared responsibility and accountability across the team. It's seamless, continuous, dynamic care and effective communication. So, do we already have this model of IPCP in neonatology? Well, sort of, but then not really. So, and that model is HI-FI or family integrated care. Sorry, I should have said FI care, not HI-FI. The goal of FI care is to facilitate a partnership and collaboration between parents and the neonatal staff to promote parent-child interaction and to build parents' confidence. So parents are integrated into all aspects of care and become members of the neonatal team. However, the neonatal team still functions in a more interdisciplinary type of team, so as in the middle column, rather than the right-hand column, which is an interprofessional collaborative practice team. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to explore this model of care today. However, if we are to address neonatal workforce sustainability, we need to explore further the roles of interprofessional collaborative practice.
And that brings us on to the next question. Do you believe you have a sustainable workforce in your unit? And our next question is, what is the biggest challenge for your unit? Is it lack of staff, lack of skilled staff, or perhaps something else? We're now going to move on to staffing ratios, which are a global problem, and ask yourselves the question: to provide quality care, how many babies can a nurse or doctor safely look after?
Neonatal nursing shortages have hit the headlines in the UK, particularly in 2020 when we demonstrated a severe national shortage of nurses. And I'm sure many of you have had the same thing happen in your countries. Other pieces of research have highlighted that the shortage of nurses and the lack of specialist training results in poor quality outcomes, increased infection, missed care, so increased incidence of tissue injury from tissued IV infusions, medication errors, and even death. And it's also, staffing numbers are also important when looking at the impact on staff well-being. The fewer staff, the higher the incidence of burnout and the higher the incidence of staff turnover. So how large is the problem in our neonatal units? In the United Kingdom, we're lucky to have agreed national neonatal nursing standards. This means that the commissioners, they're the people that contract for us to provide neonatal care, should ensure that they provide sufficient funds to enable appropriate nurse staffing of our neonatal units. We also have a national dashboard which collects daily data on every baby in the UK who's in a neonatal unit and allows us to monitor every unit's neonatal staffing against this service specification. So what does this dashboard tell us? Importantly, everybody has to contribute to the dashboard because it's part of our national audit programme, so participation is mandatory. And on this slide here, we've got data on nursing staffing from 173 neonatal units in England, Wales and Scotland. In the UK, we organise our neonatal units into networks, clinical networks for delivering care, and they're geographically based. And so on the slide, we have all the networks. Network consists of a neonatal intensive care unit, which collaborates with local neonatal units and special care baby units. And all neonatal care in the UK is delivered through these networks. What we can see on this slide, the slide on the left refers to records the number of times nursing shifts were appropriately staffed, i.e. you had the right number of nurses to care for the babies on your unit. And you can see that on average in 2019, 69% of nursing shifts were appropriately staffed, had the right number of nurses. However, you can see it varies across the network. So some do better than the national average. Some, this is my network in Northwest London, don't do well. Only 45% of our nursing shifts were appropriately staffed. And what we see as a whole is that generally it's the neonatal intensive care units that have fewer staff per shift to care for babies. The units caring for the less sick babies tend to have a higher number of staff. The second graph looks at whether or not the nurses caring for our babies are actually trained to do it. Have they got a qualification in neonatal nursing? And you'll see that in 2018 and 2019, across the whole of the UK, only 44% of the nurses caring for our babies are actually trained to do so. What's also interesting is that actually having a shortage of nurses doesn't mean your nurses are all undertrained. In actual fact, all lacking specific training. In actual fact, the network with the lowest number of trained nurses here at 22% actually has quite a good number of shifts that are adequately staffed. Now, We know we have a big problem. We have strategies that are agreed as to how we should solve them. However, it's going to take some time and we need to do much more to sort this out. We have similar problems with medical staffing, not quite as severe, but these have been persistent now for 10 years and are impacting on care. What's reassuring is that our doctors are obviously feel supported, despite the fact they're working in pressurized rotas and often having to do tasks they don't feel are appropriate. They generally report that they feel they were able to provide safe, good quality care. And I think that we have to assume that good team working is playing a large part of that. So what about Australia?
So in Australia, unlike the UK, we don't have mandatory ratios in all our states. We only have mandatory ratios for nurses in 2 or 3 of the states and territories. And this has only happened since July 2016, so we don't have such good data that you have in the UK. The ratios we do have in the 2 states that have them are supposed to be 1-to-1 in intensive care, 1-to-2, 1 nurse to 2 babies in high dependency, and 1-to-3 in special care. I work in New South Wales, one of the biggest states, and there are no mandatory ratios. It's certainly a global challenge. And now, let's find out what's happening around your units.
So please answer this question in the poll. How many doctors work on your neonatal unit in the day?
And how many doctors work on your neonatal unit at night?
Now we're going to look at nursing staff. Firstly, in your hospital, how many intensive care babies does one nurse look after? Here we've classified intensive care as meaning babies who are intubated or require complex care such as therapeutic hypothermia, receiving lots of drug infusions such as inotropes or intravenous therapy procedures, or in the immediate post-op period.
And next, in your hospital, how many high dependency babies does one nurse look after? And this slide shows examples of babies receiving high dependency care. Stable babies on CPAP and high flow, babies having TPN or with recurrent apnea and bradycardia requiring frequent intervention.
And finally, in your hospital, how many special care babies does one nurse look after? Again, the slide shows examples of special care. Their babies receiving nasogastric tube feeding, routine cardiorespiratory monitoring, phototherapy, nasal cannula oxygen, being monitored and treated for hypoglycemia, and those receiving antibiotics.
So there are challenges for human resources for health all across the world. This is a paper that we published this year with colleagues from the World Health Organization and USAID. And I was kindly supported by funding from the Chiesi Foundation to collaborate on this paper. What is interesting for me is that although we focused on low and middle income countries, our findings were pertinent to me and to everyone working in high income countries. The challenges of a quality and sustainable workforce are truly a global issue and not one that we found just in low and middle income countries. So let me talk a little bit about our review, which scoped country-focused sources to identify and map evidence on human resources for health-related challenges to quality facility-based newborn care provision by nurses and midwives. Evidence for this review was collected iteratively, beginning with pertinent WHO documents and extending to articles identified via database and manual reference searches and country reports. Evidence from country-focused sources from the year 2000 onwards were extracted. A total of 332 peer-reviewed articles were screened, of which 22 met the inclusion criteria. 14 additional sources were added through manual reference search and grey literature sources. The countries covered by this review are in the yellow on the left-hand side of the screen. So what did we find? Thematic analysis was used to map the 10 categories that came across as the highest human resources for health challenges. And as we read through them, you can reflect that they actually are pertinent to your own workplace. Lack of health worker data and monitoring, poor health worker pre-service education, lack of health worker access to evidence-based practice guidelines, continuing education, and continuing professional development, insufficient and inequitable distribution of health workers and heavy workload, as we've seen earlier in this presentation, poor retention, absenteeism and rotation of experienced staff, a poor work environment, including low salary, limited and poor supervision, and low morale, motivation and attitude, and job dissatisfaction. weaknesses of policy, regulation, management, leadership, governance and funding, and structural and contextual barriers. And many of those were that Merran has just mentioned. So moving on to our next question.
So what we'd like to ask is, if staff shortages are a problem on your neonatal unit, are they due to lack of nurses, lack of skilled nurses, lack of doctors, or lack of skilled doctors? Please tick any or all that apply to your unit.
We also published this year a roadmap with strategies to help countries with these challenges, which again, as we were writing, what we were finding in low and middle income countries became so relevant to me working in a tertiary unit in a high income country. Our vision for this roadmap was to provide strategies to ensure that every newborn would receive high quality, evidence-based care from competent health workers with skills in newborn care consistent with WHO guidelines. Our goal was to strengthen the provision of nurturing care by competent health workers at critical times at all 3 levels of care for maximum improvement of newborn survival, development, and well-being. And our objectives were to improve the number and competence of healthcare workers, to deliver high-quality essential care for all newborns and specialised care for small and sick newborns, and to fill the gap in the numbers of health workers with specialised neonatal skills in low and middle income countries required to provide high-quality inpatient care for small and sick newborns. Also important to all countries. So let's look at the 10 strategies more closely. The first 4 strategies focused on national and subnational training options to optimise current human resources for health cadres and to plan specialist roles. Each of the strategies had a rationale and then key interventions for countries, some of which I will mention in the next few slides. The first strategy was to improve and standardise the content, curricula and development of competence in neonatal care in pre-service programmes for health workers, and to build the capacity of existing newborn care providers through orientation, continuing education, skills training, quality improvement initiatives, and support to maintain and increase competence. Throughout the roadmap, the importance of education and competencies was very much highlighted. The next strategies 3 and 4, we're looking at how to upgrade existing cadres with additional specialised training in neonatal care, an additional qualification or certification at undergraduate level, and create and train a new cadre of specialised neonatal nurses. So very much focusing on education and increasing competence through accredited courses.
So now we're going to move to a series of questions in the poll, looking at the opportunities staff have to obtain training and qualifications. Our first question is, can doctors obtain recognised qualifications as a neonatologist in your country?
And along with this, can nurses obtain recognised qualifications as a specialised neonatal nurse?
Question 13. Do all staff providing nursing care to babies in your neonatal unit have a nationally recognised nursing or midwifery qualification? So what we mean by this is, do they have an undergraduate degree in nursing or a national certification in nursing?
And what percentage of nurses and midwives have a nationally recognised nursing or midwifery qualification? And please choose from the 7 options below. Question 15 is, are nurses or midwives required to be registered with a national organisation, such as a nursing council or state authority? Certainly for me in Australia, I have to be registered with the Nursing and Midwifery Board. Through the roadmap, our next strategies, we're looking at national and subnational actions for the provision of neonatal care. And our strategies number 5 looked at standardising the levels of neonatal care provision with safe referral of mothers and infants. And this was all focusing around building collaborative managerial and leadership and building the capacity of healthcare workers. Strategies 6 and 7 focused on establishing strategies for health worker recruitment, well-being, motivation and retention, and ensuring effective staffing ratios, skill mixes. And again, this is so pertinent to our own units and globally across the world. And if you have a look at some of the interventions, it was to ensure fair salaries and salary incentives are paid consistently provide continuing education and professional development, set up interdisciplinary teams, and calculate staffing from the anticipated numbers of births and referrals. So question 16, do you have problems retaining nurses and doctors in your neonatal units? Certainly around the world, there are many challenges in retaining staff. And strategies 8 and 9 of the roadmap focused on strengthening human resources planning, policy and regulations for the development and management of neonatal services, and even ensuring that we allocate adequate funds for capacity building and support for neonatal care in the national budget. And I just picked out some of the interventions that were in the document. And these are define and make available appropriate job descriptions. Do all your staff have job descriptions? Are there clear scope of practice for healthcare workers? And encouraging nurses and midwives to engage with professional organisations such as the Council of International Neonatal Nurses, where we can help with the guidance on policies, projects, education and planning. And to focus investment on trainers, so there is a good evidence of social rate of return for education strategies. And again, invest in educational infrastructure and innovative training methods. I think it's in agreement the importance of investing in education is a study that was published from colleagues in Australia last month. And they surveyed neonatal nurses in Australia regarding workforce and education practices and concluded that a quarter of the neonatal nursing workforce will retire in the next decade, similar to what Merran mentioned from the United Kingdom. They highlighted the need to recruit and educate the future workforce, and that current strategies for workplace-based education may not be meeting the learning needs of neonatal nursing staff, and we need to invest in innovative strategies. Question 17. What are the main 3 reasons nurses leave your neonatal unit? Please choose from the 6 options below.
And question 18. What are the 3 main reasons doctors leave your neonatal unit? Again, please choose from the 6 options provided.
The question, they've got poll number 19. The question, they've got the wrong question up.
The final strategy in the WHO roadmap was looking at promoting global strategies, collaborations, accountability, leadership, and governance for human resources for neonatal care. And these interventions that they suggest is to ensure the involvement of all key health professional groups at all levels of policy development. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. Nurses are one of the biggest healthcare workers and biggest group of healthcare workers and should be involved at all levels of policy development. And to facilitate the involvement of an interdisciplinary collaboration with professional organizations. Our next question is question 19. Do you have national staffing guidelines for doctors?
Karen, the slide's not moved.
Oh. And question 20, do you have national staffing guidelines for nurses? From both the roadmap and the paper, there was much focus on education and competencies. We at the Council of International Neonatal Nurses have developed a neonatal nursing competency framework, which is available on our website, and we have translated it into Russian. It was written by 17 nurses from across the world, led by a specialist nursing group. The key messages are that neonatal nursing is a recognized, highly specialized field, and to meet the complex needs of neonates and their families, we need to ensure that there are uniform qualifications and competencies to support standard knowledge and clinical performance. The document we wrote presents a competency framework using Benner's model that goes from novice to expert neonatal nurse, and it's now being used to guide curriculum development, orientation to the specialization, and for performance review. The competency framework has 5 areas: clinical practice, professional ethics and legal practice, leadership and teamwork, infant family-centered developmental care, and research. And this is available free on the COIN website.
So Karen has presented outlined the extremely important neonatal nursing competencies that COIN have produced. I'm sure quite a lot of you have medical competencies for training your medical staff. On this slide here, I've put the ones that are relevant to training the medical staff who care for babies on our neonatal units. And Also on this slide is an outline of the rigorous assessment that our doctors go through during their training to ensure that when they are qualified as a specialist in whether it's pediatrics or neonatology, they are competent to provide care to our babies and their families. Equally, we have recognised national training programmes with competency frameworks for our neonatal nurses and neonatal practitioners and neonatal advanced practitioners. For nurses, these are all at postgraduate and master's level. Very importantly, though, our babies, families, and for us as staff on neonatal units, we need and we must work in teams with allied healthcare professionals. Neonatal care or specialism within these allied health professions in aspects of neonatal care, it's a very, very small amount of their normal workload and their normal training. So in particular, these specialties do need their own set of competencies for caring for babies on neonatal units. And we're lucky in the UK that our allied healthcare professionals work in partnership with us in the British Association of Perinatology, and together have produced competency documents to help the members of their profession, whether they be physiotherapists, pharmacists, occupational therapists, dietitians, or speech and language therapists, to help them understand and ensure they have training in the competencies that are required for them to work within a neonatal unit and as part of multidisciplinary, interprofessional, collaborative neonatal teams. So now that brings us to question 13. Sorry, 13? 21. It's getting long. In your hospital, who provides training and education for neonatal nurses? And please select all that apply. Is training provided by doctors, senior nurses? Do you have nurse educators? A nurse educator is a qualified nurse who's got additional training in education. She may hold a master's in education. It may just be your local course for educating the trainers. And are they specifically employed in that post to provide training, education, and develop your staff? Do you have joint education sessions and training for doctors and nurses and the wider interdisciplinary team? I think we've heard a lot today about the importance of us providing education and training together, breaking down those barriers between our professions.
Absolutely. And we're going to finish this part by mentioning one of the most important groups to collaborate with, and that is parents. And I'm delighted to share with you a little information about GLANCE, which is the Global Alliance for Newborn Care. It was founded under the umbrella of the European Foundation for the Care of the Newborn Infants, EFCNI, by Silke Mader. And in 2018, GLANCE was officially registered, and in 2019, they held their first founding committee meeting. And at this meeting, they started to decide on their first global campaigns, which with the pandemic, the global campaign focused very much on zero separation. You can see on the slide statements from the committee as a whole, and one I was asked to write on behalf of neonatal nurses advocating for zero separation of mothers and babies during this pandemic. The power of parents is so strong, as you will all be aware with EFCNI, and now we have a global parent organisation. It is so important to work with our parents. And this brings us on to question 23. Outside of COVID times, are families welcome in your unit 24 hours a day? Mother, father, siblings?
So during this session, we aim to have illustrated how it's important and possible to educate our staff together, to collaborate together, and to invest in the whole of our workforce so that we can create a sustainable workforce for the future. What's clear is that there's an urgent need for investment in the neonatal workforce, and that investment is not just financial. Many workplaces are in crisis, and this is now compounded by our current pandemic. The pandemic has shown us that creating a sustainable workforce has never been more important. Many of our colleagues are suffering from overwork, fatigue, burnout, and psychological stress. However, COVID-19 has highlighted the essential role of healthcare workers and could provide the necessary impetus to educate, collaborate, and invest in a sustainable workforce. After all, there is much we've had to do which we never thought we could do during the pandemic. People have taken on roles they never had to do before and learnt how to do them quickly. Many of us have worked across disciplines we never expected to do so. So let's use COVID-19 as the impetus to change.
We'll now move to the...
Karen, please.
No, we'll now move to the results of our poll and answer the questions that we've received.
Karen, start off. The final thing's just coming up.
Okay. Thank you. If I'm allowed to share my screen, I will give you the results of the poll. If you can allow me to share the screen, that would be great. And please put any questions and comments into the chat so that we can answer some questions as well. Thank you. So can you see my screen okay there? Yeah, I can see it on the screen. Our first question was, where are you from? So you can see from the slide that you're from all over the world, which is such a credit to the organizers for such an interesting program. Along with the countries on this slide, and you can see the most popular country was Russia there. We also have people, and thank you so much for adding into the chat, from the United States, RAM, and also from Ireland, Mexico, the Ukraine, Armenia, and Portugal. So certainly you're from all around the world. Our next question, what is your profession? The majority of people here attending the conference who've replied to the poll, and there were 67 answers, are medical doctors, 3 nurses, and 4 other. We'd be very interested to know what the other are, so please put it into the chat. My next question was, do you believe you have a sustainable workforce in your unit? 60% said yes, which is really good, and 40% obviously said no. Question 4 was, what's the biggest challenge for your unit? Lack of staff or lack of skilled staff or other? And again, the people who've put other, please put it into the chat so that we can collect this data as well. Question 5, how many doctors work on your neonatal unit during the day? The most common answers were 2 and 4, and it would depend on size of units, as Ram has put in the chat. And how many doctors at night? Certainly goes down. 1 was the most common answer there. Some units had 2. Question 7 was was about nursing, and how many intensive care babies does one nurse look after? The most common answer there was 3 intensive care babies. And that was interesting, looking at the ratios from some countries which are 1-to-1. The high dependency babies, again, were similar, with 1-to-3 as the most common answer. For special care babies, it was 1 nurse. The most common answer there was 1 nurse to 5 babies, and 27% of respondents answered that. If staff shortages are a problem in your neonatal unit, is it due to lack of nurses, skilled nurses, lack of doctors, and lack of skilled doctors? And the most common answer there was lack of skilled nurses. And certainly this is quite a global issue. In your country, can doctors obtain recognised qualifications as a neonatologist? Really good, 91% said yes. So good to have the neonatology qualification. Can nurses obtain recognised qualifications as a neonatal nurse? 66% said no. What a difference. Question 13 was, do all the staff providing nursing care to babies in your neonatal unit have a nationally recognised nursing or midwifery qualification? And 73% said yes, so that's really good. What percentage have a nationally recognised nursing or midwifery qualification? And 46% of you said that all staff do, which is good, but 27% were unsure. Question 15 was, are nurses and midwives required to be registered? And 62% said yes and 38% no. There's great differences around the world. Do you have any problems retaining nurses and doctors in your neonatal unit? Yes, for 76% of nurses and 49% of doctors. So it certainly is a problem to retain staff, and we have that problem in Australia. And then we'll stop there because the questions are still being hold, and we might just have a look at across to you, Merran, for those questions.
If I could have the ability to share the screen, that would be good.
I will stop sharing and pass them over to you.
So here we go.
Oh, and thanks to everybody for the information in the chat. We will collect all this information.
So well, I'm just pulling up. Am I going to question 17? Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
Can people see question 17 now? Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, what I was going to say is that we hope at the end of this we'll be able to pull it all together and provide you a written summary as to what all the answers were. So question 17 was, what were the 3 main reasons nurses were leaving your unit? And the commonest one was low pay, but shortly followed by better jobs elsewhere, and a fair number leaving because they were emigrating. Question 18. Now, we're going to run the poll live now because that poll question didn't appear. So can we have that poll question, please? Hopefully it's going to
Dear
run.
Dr. Thompson, we need like 5 minutes to run it live if we have this time.
Okay, so shall we do that at the end? When we come to the end of the questions, do you think you'll be able to run it then?
Yes, of course.
Okay, brilliant. All right, so we'll move on now to question 19. So in question 19, we asked if there were national staffing guidelines for the number of doctors you should have on your unit. And it's good to see that just over half of respondents said yes, they did. So what about for nurses? Again, we had 61% of respondents said that there were national staffing guidelines for their nurses. It would be interesting to know if those meet the those we have in the UK and in Australia or in the US. And perhaps we can discuss that when we come to the end of the questions. Question 21. We were asking about how education and training was provided for nurses and who provided it. And there is an equal really between, sorry. There's an equally distributed between it being provided by doctors and by senior nurses. The nurse educator, just over a quarter of respondents said that they have a nurse educator. Question 22 was about joint education for doctors and nurses together, and it's really good to see that 3/4 of respondents said that yes, this was happening. And then the final question in our poll was about access that parents and siblings have, and particularly whether or not they can come any time of the day or night. And almost everybody, but not everybody, mothers are allowed to come 24/7. About 50% said fathers were, but only 10% enable siblings to come. Now, any chance we can do question 18 now? No? Okay, let's go.
Excuse me, dear Merran, it takes some time for us to...
Okay, all right. We'll let us know, put in the chat when we can come back to it, okay?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Perhaps people could answer it in the chat while we're waiting.
Yes. But have we got any questions in the chat? I know, Ram, you've been posting quite a lot.
I'm responding to Karen.
Okay, so how are things different?
Now, we are in a luxury in the US. So we have a multi-specialty support group with nurses. As I said, if babies on ECMO, there are 2 nurses to 1 baby. And we have a respiratory care practitioner. We have a perfusionist when the baby's on ECMO. If the babies are not on ECMO, intubated, inotropes, or pressor support, then we have 1-to-1. For example, if the baby's on cooling, it becomes 1-to-1. So, and then I said 1-to-2, it's a relatively stable baby. We used to have 1-to-4, but it's a nursing union, which rightly did, said we cannot take care of 4 babies, feeding, even though they're growing preemies, monitoring, talking to the family, all of them take their time. So we only can have, by regulation in our state, even in the country, is 1-to-3 is the max. Rarely you will see 1-to-4. Sometimes LVNs can help. Otherwise, that's the ratio. Plus, we have respiratory care practitioners on top of that. So I don't see that in many other parts of the world, but in the US, it's pretty common. RCPs or respiratory therapists when the babies are intubated.
I'm really interested in respiratory care practitioners. So I've just put it in the chat to all the attendees. Do you have them anywhere else? Because we certainly don't have them in Australia.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Ram, can I come back to you on what you said about increasing the nurse-patient ratio? And you said the nursing union. Are you really? I think what you're saying is that the nurses themselves were the drivers of increasing the number of nursing. But how did those nurses become empowered to do that?
No, with the support of doctors and other workers and administrators. So we collaboratively, our nurses and us, we meet with the administration on a regular basis to talk about, what can we do to improve. But our retention rate is extremely high. I have nurses who've been with me for 32 years that I've been at USC. I mean, it's very rare that people move around here in the US, except for family reasons. Job satisfaction, both in a public hospital and private hospital. Nursing is number one, it's high demand, nursing. So everybody will take a very good nurse without asking any questions. So job satisfaction among nurses are very good in the US. That is in my unit.
Ram, I think I've got a message that we can take poll 18. So we're I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully can people see it? Has it come through yet?
Yep, it's there.
So this question was about why doctors leave, and please select the 3 main reasons doctors leave.
Do you keep your doctors as well, Ram? Do they stay as like the nurses? Yeah. That's good.
And are you going to show us the result live on the screen? Here we go. I have it on my screen. Do you have it on yours?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So better jobs elsewhere and low pay, but more than a quarter leaving because they're emigrating, and low morale and family commitments. So really, I think those 2 questions tell us that the workforce is actually under stress. Whether they be doctors or nurses, the majority of our workforce is under stress. And I think really what's evident to everybody, it's going to be up to us as people working in neonatal care to make changes to help things improve. and the WHO clearly recognise that. And as Karen said, a lot of the strategies they're producing actually provide very helpful frameworks for everybody to use in their own countries.
I think what you said, Ram, is really interesting, is that the nurses had the support of the medical staff and everybody was trying to work together to improve ratios for both nursing and medical staff. I think that's really important. And perhaps that's something that other countries can learn from the US, because you've obviously done well there.
Yeah, I mean, I for example, I make what I call chief rounds. So I go once a month to the night shift, who are pretty much ignored, what's happening in the day shift, lots of discussions, lots of consultants. So the night shift nurses don't know exactly why we are doing certain things. So either I ask somebody else to go and talk to the nursing staff. Okay, what questions, what things we are doing, why are we doing this? So that keeps them motivated, interested in patient care, not just coming in, shift and going. We want them to be fully educated on what we do.
I think the advantages of workshops are like this is that we can actually hear from other people and learn from what's happening in other countries as well. So I think these are really useful. Any other questions or comments? Because I'm looking at the time and conscious that we need to stop. We have to have a break for 10 minutes now, and then we have the case studies. Any last questions or comments that anybody or any of the panelists would like to join?
Catherine had commented on the chat box about how well you both
She
did.
Our nurse to patient ratios can also be varied due to sickness of the patients, but this has just started. Catherine, did you want to elaborate a little bit on that? That's really interesting.
Are you there, Catherine? No.
She muted, but I don't know whether she left. Okay. Maybe you want to have a 5-minute break.
Yes.
If it's okay, right?
Just a 5-minute break so that then, Candice, thank you all so much. It's been really, it would have been so much fun to do this in person. Maybe next year we'll be able to all travel.
Maybe next year we can actually have a workshop where we discuss how people are making and can make changes, share experiences. Thank you.
Здравствуйте, дорогие коллеги. Приветствую вас всех на нашем форуме. И вашему вниманию предоставляю свой клинический случай аплазия кожи. Значит, аплазия кожи – это очаги аплазии кожи неправильной формы на спине, на бедрах и голени у нашего новорожденного ребенка, который родился в результате самопроизвольных родов. Проведенное лечение мы будем еще разбирать, антибактериальную терапию, также обработка кожи раствором фурацилина, мазью салкосилил или ваниколь чередованием, и положительная динамика в состоянии нашего новорожденного на фоне проведенной терапии. Значит, из анамнеза ребенок родился от 3-й беременности, предыдущие 2 беременности без особенностей, дети здоровые. В сроке гестации 27 недель мама перенесла ОРВИ, острая респираторная вирусная инфекция. Лечилась она сама без консультации специалистов. Ребенок родился в сроке гестации 38 недель. Вес ребенка составил 2690 грамм. Рост 48 сантиметров, окружность головы 34 сантиметра, окружность груди 33 сантиметра. ОАПГАР 6-7 баллов. Значит, на 3-й день выставили диагноз врожденный сепсис, врожденная аплазия кожи. Дыхательная недостаточность первой степени, состояние после респираторного дистресс-синдрома и кровоизлияние внутрижелудочкового первой степени справа. Значит, какие проводились обследования? Это общий анализ крови. Со стороны красной крови в норме было. Со стороны белой крови лимфоцитоз, гранулоцитопения, моноцитоз. Биохимический анализ крови в пределах нормы. Также микрореакция была отрицательная. Рентгенограмма, незначительные признаки задержки фетальной жидкости. На нейросонографии внутрижелудочковое кровоизлияние первой степени справа и гипоксическое ишемическое поражение ЦНС. Также на эхокардиографии открыто овальное окно, открытый артериальный проток. Также консультации проводились дерматовенеролога и хирурга-компустиолога. Значит, какую мы использовали терапию в данном случае? Это респираторная поддержка, назальный СИПАП, антибактериальная терапия, ампицилин, гентамицин, стартовая антибактериальная терапия, с целью профилактики геморрагического синдрома аммониака, инфузионная терапия, это 10% глюкоза с компонентами, парентеральное питание, это 10% аминогенный инфант, также симптоматическая терапия, никосан с профилактической целью каждые 72 часа. Также обработка кожи раствором урацилина, салфосилиевая мазь и левониколь мазь чередовали. Значит, эту форму заболевания можно отнести к 5-й группе заболевания. Также течение заболевания носило доброкачественный неосложненный характер, что проявилась быстрой эпителизацией дефектов кожи. Положительная динамика в лечении – это результат слаженной работы команды перинатального центра. Что мы могли улучшить? В данном случае это является спорадическим. Также неизвестно, было ли проведено медико-генетическое обследование. Во время родов не была проведена профилактика антибактериальной терапии женщине. Лечение по литературным данным в большинстве случаев консервативное. Профилактика инфекции, применение местных мазей. И также в случае обширных дефектов это хирургическая коррекция кожи. Значит, аплазия кожи – это врожденное заболевание, редко в первую очередь является клиническим диагнозом, поэтому дополнительное лабораторное и клиническое обследование у нас не проводилось. Для нас остается также неясной причиной возникновения данного случая и, возможно, присутствие генетического какого-либо нарушения. Нерешенные вопросы для семьи – это наблюдение в катанозе, косметическая коррекция, в каком возрасте была проведена, физическое и психомоторное развитие данного ребенка тоже нам неизвестно. И проводила ли семья данное генетическое обследование, тоже остается загадкой. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Is Sarbas on the call? Can we see you? Hello, welcome.
Здравствуйте, да, слышно.
Yes, hello, I can hear you.
Good.
Я приветствую вас. I welcome you. Good day.
So, Christoph, you want to comment, please?
I have one comment and one question. Oh no, two questions. The first question is, you said it belongs to group 5. What do you mean with group 5? I mean, there is an old classification of these Aplasia cutis congenita, but that looks different to me. And the second one is, what about varicella infection, fetal varicella or maternal fetal varicella infection? Because most of these Aplasia cutis congenita, I've seen a few ones are here up on the head.
Ну, 5-я группа, мы ее...
Grade 5. It's because we thought it was
Поэтому...
sporadic case. That's why we classed it as grade 5. And the fact that it's on the hairy part of the head, well, no.
Части головы участков аплазии у него чисто были на, значит, на боковой поверхности живота и на бедрах в основном. А на волосистой части не было.
And what about varicella?
Как насчет варицеллы?
Не ставили этот диагноз.
Thank you.
Okay. I think the timing of the timing of the plastic surgery, the corrective surgery, has to be very much dictated by your plastic surgeons, but also if the scarring is restricting the development of the limb, it's tight or anything like that. But presumably this baby is under follow-up with the plastic surgeon.
Хирург, вот на днях я только разговаривала с мамой, еще не провели косметическую коррекцию этому ребенку, но ведет хирург. Хирург ведет ребенка. Но еще не было косметической коррекции.
Cosmetic corrections.
Very good. Ram, I think we need to move on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we have time. We have 30, is it 30 more minutes, right? So we have plenty of time. Yeah.
Oh, we have plenty of time. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have any? Ram, yes, go on.
No, I'm looking at my time. So you have to look.
All right.
3:30. Oh, no, you have 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So Ram, do you have a question?
No, I don't have any question for this case. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think, I mean, it's the good thing is that it seems to have healed well spontaneously. So very good management. Thank you. So shall we move to our next case?
Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure and great honor to participate in this scientific meeting organized by Kizi Pharmaceutical Company and moderated by leading expert in neonatal intensive care. And today I would like to present a rare clinical case of congenital heart block due to neonatal lupus erythematosus in extremely preterm premature baby. Postnatal course of this baby was otherwise complicated by neonatal morbidities typical for extremely low gestational age in neonates, including culture-negative early onset sepsis, patent ductus arteriosus with spontaneous closure, moderate stage of BPD, acquired cytomegalovirus infection, acquired through breast milk, invasive mycosis. It was fungemia caused by Malassezia furfur fungus, and retinopathy of prematurity stage 2. Finally, the outcome of the baby was comparatively favorable, with no psychomotor delay and no disabilities at 18-month follow-up. Several deteriorations of her cardiac function and elevation of myocardial damage marker brought out the hypothesis of autoimmune myocarditis, but multiple factors affecting the NICU patient made it very difficult to make a clear differential diagnosis, which is the main point of this case. The girl was born with birth weight of 790 grams, and gestational age at birth was 25 plus 0 weeks of gestation. The girl was delivered by emergency C-section at level 2 maternity hospital. C-section was performed after registration of fetal bradycardia during routine ultrasound examination, which was considered a sign of fetal distress. Previously, mother had no history of or symptoms of rheumatic disease or systemic lupus erythematosus. It was a 30-year-old prima gravida, and she considered herself to be healthy. Heart rate at birth was 65 to 70 beats per minute, and delivery room management included intubation, mechanical ventilation, Kurosurf administration, and inotropes for prolonged bradycardia. So the initial management was quite aggressive because fetal bradycardia was mistakenly considered to be a sign of unwell baby condition. After admission to the NICU, ACG showed third-degree atrioventricular block, and diagnosis of neonatal lupus was suspected and then proved by maternal SSA-SSB antibodies in maternal blood. After admission to the NICU, the baby showed and was treated the early onset neonatal culture negative sepsis for early onset negative culture sepsis, and was treated for PDA also, but the initiation of PDA treatment was considered rather late because the baby was transferred to level 3 maternity hospital only on 19th day of life. Signs of PDA with hemodynamical significance persisted, and late conservative treatment with PDA wasn't successful, but finally the PDA closed spontaneously. Period of mechanical ventilation of this baby lasted for 30 days, followed by non-invasive support up to 35 weeks of postmenstrual age. Serial deteriorations of cardiac function were discussed with pediatric cardiologists and led to a conclusion that extranodal disorders, myocarditis, are highly suspected. In this baby, treatment with systemic steroids was initiated rather early. As you can see in this slide, the first choice preparation was the dexamethasone at level 2 maternity hospital. Then it was continued with prednisolone and then changed to dexamethasone according to the more usual for neonatologists regimen, typical for BPD treatment. But anyway, we considered steroids not mainly for BPD, but mainly for treatment of this extranodal myocardial damage. There were 2 deteriorations of general condition of this baby on the 2nd and 3rd month of life. It's a quite busy slide, but I will make it brief. These 2 deteriorations was caused by invasive fungal infections and acquired CMV infection. CMV infection was acquired through breast milk and have a sepsis-like presentation, so we had to initiate specific treatment with ganciclovir. What went well in this case to our point of view, was multidisciplinary management, timely detection of complications, and reasonable treatment options for these babies, which finally led to favorable outcome of extremely premature baby with multiple pathologic conditions and survival without major morbidities and disabling complications at 18 months of corrected age. But we still don't know if aggressive steroid treatment either led to discontinuation of antibody-dependent extranodal myocardial damage and prevention of irreversible postnatal complications of neonatal lupus, or the opposite, because a situation of neonatal lupus heart blockers and myocardial damage is very rare in NICU. We relied mostly on cardiologist opinion in this case. But in summary, given the objective of complications possibly associated with prolonged steroid exposure, fungemia and clinically significant acquired cytomegalovirus infection presented as sepsis-like syndrome. Next time, I think we will consider more strict criteria for steroid use. In terms of diagnosis, the discussion points are: what is exact list of antibodies except SSA and SSB that we should check in baby when we have a suspicion of neonatal lupus? Do we really need quantitative measurements of antibodies? Should we suspect myocardial damage having only biochemical markers and circulating antibodies, or we should use any other criteria? And in terms of what could have we done better and what would we do different next time? We would not start steroids early. We would use more strict criteria for steroids, definitely. Maybe we would consider intravenous immunoglobulin in this case. When we probably will admit such a woman with fetal bradycardia, we will consider fetal heart block as a rare case of fetal bradycardia before performing emergency C-section. We would control myocardial damage markers early, and definitely in extremely rare cases with limited experience and knowledge, we would ask as many experts as we can to find the reasonable solution for treatment in such a difficult situation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anna. Nice presentation. Are you with us? Could you switch on your video camera if you have one?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm greatly pleased to be invited.
Panel got any questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Great presentation. You know, this is typically how the baby's heart block then goes back to the mom's diagnosis, right? Oftentimes mothers are asymptomatic. The mom's lupus status gets diagnosed when the baby gets cardiac arrhythmias or fetal arrhythmia. I'm not sure this is third degree complete congenital heart block, because the heart rate is variable, right? So once the baby has complete heart block, there's nothing we can do. It's not reversible. So fixed heart rate, no conduction from the atria to the ventricle, which case you need to use a pacemaker. So your heart rate that you showed varied from 60 to 80. So I was wondering what the heart rate was. Was it changing? Did it go back up to hundreds?
No, for sure not. It was a real third degree heart block, and the heart rate varied in a quite narrow range from 60, 62. It was as a minimal heart rate we ever observed in this baby, to maybe to 75 to 80. It was a maximum, and we experienced serial deteriorations of conductivity while we were we were using antifungals with effect on conductive system. You know, amphotericin is involved in inhibition of conductivity, and we experienced this rare effect on this baby, on this vulnerable baby, and we have had to we had some discussions whether it is better to stop this treatment, because during this the treatment with amphotericin, the heart rate tended to be in the lowest range. But luckily, it was in the end of the course of antifungal treatment, and we discontinued it successfully, and then it went more easily.
Okay, Catherine, you put a question in the chat.
Yeah, I can do it live if you prefer. Yeah, we had a similar case. So hi, Anna, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you.
And we really put in an external pacemaker, and even if it was an extremely preterm baby, if it's an external pacemaker, it wasn't a big issue actually. But in our case, there was the lactate going up and metabolic acidosis, so low blood pressure. So there was actually no question to try it. So in your case, the baby always was hemodynamically stable?
No. Initially, this baby was unstable, and for the first 19 days of life, this baby received vasopressors for hemodynamic instability. This girl was on mechanically ventilated, and her cardiac function was somehow involved with signs of myocardial dysfunction and decreased contractility. This is why the hypothesis of myocardiopathy conducted with neonatal lupus was discussed in this baby. But in terms of cardiac pacing, to our regret, we don't have a possibility to make, and B, this baby is quite well without any cardiac pacemaker till now. And as far as I know, the indications for pacemaking start with heart rate of 55 to 60, and signs of cardiac dysfunction, which is in interference with baby growth and development. And this baby, as far as I know now, is quite stable and developing in a normal ranges. Parents don't want to even talk about pacemaking this time.
So the heart block has continued, has it? There hasn't been a recovery of the heart rate?
For sure.
Okay, Christoph.
Yeah, this is a really interesting case, because in neonatal cardiology, you frequently hear that an increased cardiac output is only possible by increasing the heart rate and not so much contractility or stroke volume, which doesn't seem to be right completely, because this baby apparently makes it with much lower heart rates, and we know it from term babies that we have term babies with 60, 70, 80 that are doing very well, where we would get very, very nervous if that would be an untrained baby, not in utero trained baby, that would come up with a heart rate of 60, other than in deep sleep and could be stimulated, but as a constant setup. So there must be something, some adaptive way that the stroke volume went up. But you said you had decreased contractility, but did you have any data on stroke volume? Was that possible to get?
I can't define it quite now, but I think that it is connected items. So in decreased contractility, the stroke volume also was bad.
Okay.
And
Sorry.
I was going to ask, what advice have you given the mother and the obstetricians for the for her next pregnancy?
For sure, I must say that the communication with mother was a challenge, because mother is neglecting her condition, and until now she's not in a we are not sure that we have that the mother has the full understanding of the situation, of her further situation, but for sure we advised her to be followed and treated in a third level maternity hospital for the next time, where several options are present, including in utero treatment. Usually it includes also steroids and intravenous immunoglobulin, and for sure it must be very close second trimester management, in terms of not to repeat this situation in future. But now mother says that she's full. She don't want to have another babies. So maybe.
Yeah. But at least she's had the advice. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Good. Thank you. And it must have been a very challenging baby. So you did well.
And what about steroids? What is your opinion about steroids in this case? Because we still don't know whether we did better with steroids, or whether we did nothing, or
I think did nothing, because once the fibrosis happens, it's not reversible. I've not seen any case reports of reversible complete heart block. So in a preterm baby, external pacing, as Katrine said, is the option, because they can't do transvenous pacing because the veins are smaller and the myocardium, is very fragile. So they have to do external pacemaking. But in a term baby, they can do transvenous pacemaker. Yeah, this mom needs definitely, if she wants to have pregnancy, good prenatal care, early text. You had a question about breast milk and antibodies. There is no data to support that antibodies going through breast milk will have any impact on this baby's heart function.
Thanks a lot for your comment, but I must notice that the reversal of block wasn't an option in this case. We considered extranodal conditions of extranodal myocardial damage, which happens in 20% of these babies, in adding to conductive system impairment.
Yeah, I mean, the baby is lucky. I mean, he's able to adapt, as Christoph said. I have a feeling that because fetally this baby had bradycardia, so it's fetal adaptation. That's probably what helped this baby.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering or imagining your resuscitation situation, having a baby with a heart rate of 60, a preemie baby, where at least maybe after a few minutes you get nervous, don't get the heart rate up, and then think maybe it's a pneumothorax or whatever. You would do lots of crazy stuff if you don't know that there was. Congratulations that the baby survived so well. Really, congratulations to Moscow.
You are right. You are right. It was a challenging situation in the delivery room, but hopefully only 2 adrenaline shots and continuous dopamine infusion.
To the neonatologists, or
yeah, it was quite aggressive, but not so aggressive as it might be.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think we should move on to our next case, and I can see Artem is here on the screen. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. I think we will see the recording first and then come to you live.
Okay. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm happy to be here today, and warming greetings from Uzbekistan to everybody. Let me present a clinical case of mediastinal cyst in previously healthy newborn. On the one hand, this is a relatively simple case, and on the other hand, this case has forced our team to rethink our approach to the treatment of such a common disease as pneumothorax. Summary of the case: term baby, 2-week-old, male, 3.9 kilo, 52 centimeter. Apgar score was 7 and 9. Primary adaptation of the infant was good, and the early postpartum period was routine without any special features. The child gave a clinical presentation of respiratory distress and poor feeding, and after checkup and investigations, congenital mediastinal cyst was diagnosed. Diagnosis and history. On first examination, the infant had a respiratory rate of 60 per minute, had saturation 87 in room air, and showed chest retraction. On the left side were found decreased breath sounds and no fever. The past medical and birth history of the patient were unremarkable. Laboratory tests didn't show signals of infection. Capillary blood gas was pH 7.26 and PCO2 62 millimeter. The chest X-ray showed hyperinflation of the left lung, causing a marked shift of the mediastinum to the right and right upper lobe atelectasis. The child was stable and the condition did not worsen, which is why a CT scan was performed to clarify the diagnosis. CT scan was performed on the next morning and showed a cystic mass with compressions of the trachea and left main bronchus. Treatment. Due to impending respiratory failure after CT scan, the child was transferred to the operating room for surgical resection of cystic mass. The mass had no connection with the trachea or esophagus and was removed without any problems. Histopathologically, the cyst consisted of tissue from both respiratory and intestinal tissue. What was well? Diagnosis was quickly established and surgical intervention was carried out in a short time. The correct decision was made at CT scan, which allowed to exclude pneumothorax. The mother were informed. What could we have done better? The primary diagnosis was still pneumothorax. The only thing that kept us from draining immediately was that the baby wasn't getting worse at the time. Antenatal screening was supposed to identify this case, and the initial examination of the newborn after delivery should identify this case in normal wise. Question for discussion and question for asking. What should we look for during the clinical examination of newborn after delivery, which an unclear prenatal history, and do we need to review the intervention criteria for the treatment of neonatal pneumothorax? Thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you, Artem. Very nice presentation. Should we discuss the pneumothorax aspect first of all? Okay.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to hear the panel's views, but my opinion is always to be very wary of sticking, of draining what you think is a pneumothorax if the baby is not particularly unwell with it. So you didn't have a particular acidosis, there was a mild acidosis, and the baby sounds as if he was, although he was tachypneic, he wasn't too distressed. And so although the x-ray looked as if it was a pneumothorax, the clinical signs don't quite fit with the x-ray.
Can you pull up the x-ray again?
Sorry?
Can you pull up the x-ray again?
Yeah.
Would be nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Christoph, what do you think?
Yeah, it's challenging. As you said, the baby is maybe, we had a similar case just right now today, where the X-ray was not fully AP, so it was a kind of misprojection. So we said we rather do it again. The baby was in a quite good condition, so we waited. And in this case, it was a pneumothorax, but we didn't drain it because the baby was too well for that. Yeah.
Yeah, routinely we provide draining immediately after X-ray, but as I told, the baby was stable.
Yeah.
That's why we decided to provide CT scan. It was, I think it was like some challenge or experiment, but it was successful.
It was the right decision, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think you could also interpret the X-ray as an atelectasis primary, and it's a secondary hyperinflation. So I would probably also have waited. So I think there are two things. You can stick in the needle on the left, or you can just, did you position the baby? Probably we would have probably lied the baby on the right side, or on the left, sorry.
Yes.
I mean, even if it's a doubt, if you tap cyst or pneumo, baby should get better. I think this baby was quite stable. That's probably gave you enough time to get a CT scan and not to rush. Yeah, retrospectively, it's a good decision. But even somebody had put in a needle, I don't think we can say, well, you shouldn't have done that.
So what was in this cystic mass? First, when I saw it, the tissue there, it looked like there was fluid in there, but that's not very likely with this, together with this X-ray and
air. Yeah, in the cystic mass was air, and as our pathologist described, it's intestinal and lungs tissues.
So it must have had a connection to the bronchial or tracheal system somehow.
No, not connection. During surgery, we didn't find connection with the bronchus.
That's funny.
I don't know why, but we find some we find some fistula, but it's not difficult to clamp it. Maybe it was small bronchs.
I mean, it has to be communicating, as Professor Christoph said, otherwise air cannot get in there, right? If there was air.
And will not stay, yeah.
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 I mean, if you would have put a needle in, you would have deflated this balloon. The baby would have even become better, but you might have had a surprise a little later then again. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sure. As for me, now when I have some clinical presentation of pneumothoraxes, I always remember about this case and think first, what could it be?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I had one question that I was confused about your comment on antenatal screening and picking this up. What sort of antenatal screening do you have in your country?
We have full volume of perinatal screening, including ultrasound and lab tests, but not in the main cities. And I'm working in third-level hospital, which collect patients from outside, from villages, from regions, and in our regions we don't have enough prenatal screening offices. That's why we very often have cases with no remarkable antenatal history.
So in this case, it wasn't that the ultrasounds during pregnancy didn't pick it up.
No.
It was there weren't any ultrasounds during pregnancy. Okay. Yeah.
Not provided.
Yeah. Good.
I mean, if we are going back to that pneumothorax thing, then technically, or from lung physiology or functionality, it behaves like a pneumothorax, right? It's an air accumulation outside of the lung, taking up airspace and also having potentially a right shift. So if you don't know anything, I think it's absolutely not wrong to go in with a needle, and most likely you will improve. Maybe there was nothing to see also in utero, because maybe they needed first to go air into the pulmonary system so that it could be blown up.
Yeah. And Ram, I don't have a clock that I can see.
It's 7:06. We are 6 minutes over. That's okay. I mean, in a virtual conference, we did great. Again, I put in the chat box. I would like to thank all of you, the speakers from all over the world, including down under, as we say, Dr. Karen Walker. Thank you for your participation. And from Ireland to Los Angeles, to Germany, to UK, and most importantly, the participants, the attendees from all over the Eastern European countries and Russia. Without your participation, there is no conference, right? So I thank you again. I know it takes a lot of effort to get these case conferences or case reports. I hope we gave you some answers at least to some of the questions. We all deal with this cases like this. Even yesterday there was a case, we said, I don't know, just ask the gastroenterologist or hepatologist. Rare cases, or geneticist on another case. So I'd like to thank everybody, Artem and his gang of translation services, Ursula, Tatiana, and Casey for supporting this event. And I look forward to meeting in person, hopefully next year. In the meantime, be safe, stay blessed, take care of you, and most importantly, you have to take care of yourself and your families. Then only you can take care of the babies and families that they trust in our hands. Any other closing remarks from the speakers from today? Merran, Karen, Christoph, David?
Thank
Virginia.
you very much.
Just to say thank you to everybody, and thank you also to the three who did the case presentations now. They were very good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Dear speakers, thank you very much. Dear speakers, thank you very much. There is a small announcement for the participants. Dear participants, thank you for your participation in NPMF 2021. We're looking forward to seeing you next year. You can leave your feedback under the link which you have in your chat. And another announcement is that starting Monday, April 19, all the record of NPMF 2021 would be available at the platform npmf2021.org for 2 months. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well. Stay healthy.